Emile Griffith's fists were feared across the boxing world, but what haunted him most wasn't what happened inside the ring. Because behind the titles and toughness was a secret so dangerous, it forced him to live a double life.
As Griffith comes over to console with him, and Dr. Schiff works over him.
One cruel taunt from Benny Paret triggered one of the most violent, unforgettable nights in boxing history. It wasn't just an insult, it was a threat. It left one man dead and the other carrying a skeleton in the closet, and a guilt that would haunt him for the rest of his life. How did one word change boxing forever? And how did Griffith become a legend when his whole life was a lie? To understand how it all took root and how it nearly destroyed him, we have to go back to where it all began. But before we do, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Emile Griffith didn't grow up dreaming of championship belts. In the 1940s, he was just another kid in St. Thomas, one of 8 children, scraping by in a noisy working-class home. Life was simple: chores, music, survival. No one expected greatness. But all that changed when the Griffith family moved to New York City. The pace was different. So was the pressure. To help out, Emile took a job in a Manhattan hat factory. He was quiet, built like a statue, and strong as hell. His boss, Howie Albert, saw it and made a suggestion that would change everything. You ever think about boxing? At first, he stepped into the gym out of curiosity, but what trainers saw was raw talent, speed, balance, instinct. Within months, he was winning amateur tournaments, beating more experienced fighters with ease. His rise wasn't slow, it wasn't subtle. He was a natural. By the late 1950s, Griffith was tearing through the welterweight division. Sharp jab, slick footwork, a ring IQ years beyond his age. He didn't just win, he made good fighters look average. And outside the ropes, he was just as disarming, polite, humble, charismatic without trying. In a sport filled with loudmouths, Griffith didn't need to talk. He let his hands speak for him. In 1961, his moment came, a title shot against Benny "Kid" Paret. Griffith boxed beautifully, took the belt, and proved what insiders already knew. He wasn't just a contender, he was the future of the division. And for a brief moment, everything seemed possible. Griffith wasn't just racking up wins, he was making history. He fought a record 337 championship rounds, a staggering number that speaks to a kind of endurance most fighters only dream of. He didn't duck opponents, didn't cherry-pick easy fights. He showed up, took on anyone, and proved over and over that he belonged at the top. But there was always more going on than what fans saw in the ring. Boxing demanded a mask, one built on toughness, masculinity, and bravado, and Griffith wore that mask well. To the public, he was everything a champion was supposed to be: skilled, composed, unshakable. But behind the scenes, he was forced to bury a truth that society and the sport had no room for. And that pressure? It was relentless. In an era that punished anything outside the norm, Griffith had to stay alert at all times, not just to avoid punches, but to avoid suspicion. He knew that one wrong word, one slip, could unravel everything he'd built. Yet somehow, he still delivered. He kept winning, kept drawing crowds. He was respected by his peers, adored by fans, and hailed as one of the most technically gifted fighters of his generation. But the divide between the man and the myth was growing. He was balancing on a knife's edge, living 2 lives, one in the spotlight, the other in the shadows. It was only a matter of time before those worlds collided. The only question was when. And when they did, it would be in the ring, with Benny "Kid" Paret standing in the opposite corner. The night of March 24, 1962, wasn't just another night at Madison Square Garden. It was the kind of night that changes everything. Emile Griffith and Benny Paret weren't just fighting for a belt. They were dragging something much heavier into the ring: wounded pride, personal pain, and a secret that had no place in America. Griffith had already taken Paret's welterweight title once. Paret took it back in a controversial decision. By the time they met for the third time, the tension wasn't just thick, it was toxic. Everyone knew this fight had history behind it, but no one was prepared for the moment that lit the fuse. Because what really set the night apart happened before a single punch was even thrown. At the weigh-in, Paret leaned in and spat out a word that shattered everything. Maricón, a Spanish slur for a gay man. In a time when any hint of homosexuality could end a career, that word wasn't just an insult, it was a threat. And Griffith heard it loud and clear. When the two men stepped into the ring, the stakes had changed. This wasn't about titles anymore. This was about rage, about survival, about one man being forced to prove, again, that he belonged in a world that barely tolerated him. The fight aired live on ABC. Millions of Americans tuned in, expecting a boxing match. What they got was a storm. The early rounds were brutal, with both fighters digging in and trading punishment. But underneath the rhythm of punches, something darker was building. Griffith wasn't just fighting for victory, he was exercising humiliation. And as the rounds wore on, you could see it in his eyes. He wasn't going to let this insult go unanswered. The crowd felt it. The commentators felt it. Hell, I felt it. And I'm sure you did too. Everyone watching knew something dangerous was about to unfold. By the 12th round, the fight had turned into something far more disturbing than sport. Griffith cornered Paret against the ropes, and then the dam burst. He threw 29 punches in just over 6 seconds. No footwork, no strategy, just raw fury, unleashed without hesitation. This wasn't a boxing combination. It was a violent reckoning, triggered by humiliation, buried pain, and years of silence. Griffith didn't stop because something inside him had snapped, and the referee, Ruby Goldstein, froze. Maybe he expected Paret to signal surrender. Maybe he was paralyzed by the shock of what he was witnessing. But by the time he stepped in, it was far too late. Paret had slumped in the ropes, unconscious, long before the final punch landed. The guilt over Benny Paret's death, the years of hiding, and the pain of never being fully accepted weighed on him. But he kept moving forward. Because Griffith's final chapter wasn't about defeat. It was about the rare kind of strength it takes to face the truth of who you are when the world has spent your whole life telling you to bury it. He endured more than most people could handle: tragedy, secrecy, violence, and illness. Yet somehow he kept searching for peace. The honesty he embraced, the love he finally allowed himself, were victories in their own right. His story isn't just about titles or highlight reels. It's about what happens when the world's expectations crash into a person's truth, and how those ripples last for decades. So when you think about Emile Griffith, don't just picture the champion with his fists raised, but the man who went home each night carrying the weight of a single moment and a secret that changed everything. Remember the man who kept fighting long after the crowds went home. Because the hardest fights aren't always in the ring. Sometimes they're the ones you wage just to be yourself. So here's my question for you. Would Emile Griffith's life have been different if he came up in today's era? How do you think society's pressures and judgments reshape our legends? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about the fights no one sees. And if you were there for Griffith versus Paret, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep diving deep into the stories beyond the ring. See you in the next one.